I'm going to tell you a story about a boy who would never grow up. About the pirate who wished to catch him. About the island where fairies roamed. But this isn't the story you've heard before. Because sometimes, friends begin as enemies, and enemies begin as friends. Sometimes, to truly understand how things end, we must first know how they begin.
Welcome to Neverland!
Are you brave, Peter?
I try to be.
We have an ancient prophecy from when the fairy kingdoms reigned on this island. The prophecy tells of a boy who would lead an uprising against me. A boy who could fly.
We'll always be friends, Hook, won't we?
Always. What could possibly go wrong?
Hello and welcome to the Nerdiest Podcast. And in today's Nerdiest Podcast episode, I am doing something special. I'm spicing up the podcast and we're doing a In Review episode, which basically means I review a piece of media that I enjoy. So it doesn't specifically have to be comic book related, superhero related, just pieces of fiction or non-fiction that I enjoy. And in today's episode, we are doing our first ever sort of review of a movie, right? So we've previously talked about Supergirl, and we do our comic book retrospectives, which are deep dives into my favorite comic books I've read in my collection, right? But in today's Nerdiest Podcast episode, I wanted to talk about a very sort of niche film, that I enjoy very much, that I think is very underrated and overhated on. And I think it's a masterpiece, and I think it's just, well, I wouldn't say a masterpiece, it definitely has flaws, and a lot of plot holes, and a sort of, bit, hard to swallow, I would say. That's how I would describe this film, is hard to swallow, hard to digest, it's quite a lot. A lot goes on, a lot of batshit stuff goes on in this film, but the film that I am going to be talking about in this episode, in this first ever Nerdiest Podcast in Review episode, is the film Pan, 2015 Pan. So it's Peter Pan, but it's the title of the film is called Pan. And it's basically a pre-origin story of how, Peter Pan, the Disney character, of how he became Peter Pan, how he became Pan, right? How he became the boy who could fly, and the boy who never grows up, right? It's sort of like the pre-origins to the original Disney, cartoon and the classic Peter Pan that we all know and love, right? So that's the film that we're going to be doing an in-review episode of. We're going to be talking about some scenes I like, some characters that I like, some things that might have flaws of, some highlights. And yeah, we're just going to get into it in this episode. So strap in. I hope you enjoy this episode. And yeah, let's go. So, as I previously mentioned, this film is just batshit crazy. I think it's one of the most recent Peter Pan projects. It was released in 2015, obviously, a classic Peter Pan sort of vibe going on, I feel like, but it's sort of a twist on that classic Peter Pan guideline sort of story. And I personally love it. I watched it when it first came out, I think. Then I forgot about it, and then I recently watched it, and I thought I would do a review talking about it, because I think it's one of my fixations is this film is just sort of, I think it's awesome. I think it's a good time. And, if you haven't watched it, go check it out. It's on Prime, I think. I rented it and I watched it, and now I'm doing a video talking about it. So there will be spoilers in this for the end and how these characters wind up. And obviously, if you don't know what happens in the film, I'm going to be talking about certain things that might be spoilers, So the film is centered around the main character, Peter Pan, obviously Pan. he isn't Peter Pan, he's more of just Peter, right? He's an orphan boy who was left on the doorstep of an orphanage during the cusp of World War I believe, or two. It's either or. I think it's one though. On the cusp of World War I in London, I believe, yeah. So, he's an orphan. He doesn't know who his parents are. He doesn't know his mother. His mother is a very central character throughout the film now. And it's sort of the motive of the character and his journey. The character of Peter Pan is sort of really interesting in the sense that he's, you know, the boy who never grows up. And he can't grow up because he doesn't have the parents, right? It's sort of interesting in that way. One word I would describe, if I had to describe this film in one word, it would be a trip. It's not a journey, it's not an adventure, it's a trip. This film is trippy weird. And I think it has a really strong start. I believe the middle is a little bit of a drag. And then the endings is fine. I like the ending. We'll be getting into the middle, ending, and the beginning. We'll talk about the beginning obviously first. So Peter Pan, he's in this orphanage. He's not Peter Pan. He can't fly. He doesn't have the world of Neverland. He's not been sort of aware of it yet. He's in this really cruel orphanage where they sort of mistreat the orphans. Obviously, it's Victorian era orphanage. It's never nice for anyone to be in that situation, right? The main reason why I wanted to talk about this film, and probably why I like it so much, is because it shows, you know, everybody knows Peter Pan, Captain Hook, you know, the crocodile, the Lost Boys, you know, Mary, I think her name is, right? Those are the sort of classic Peter Pan characters. But this is a whole new set of characters. Well, but it also isn't. It's the same characters, but in a different era of their lives, right? And I think that's really interesting and something that was very appealing. So the story, you know, we talked about Peter Pan being in an orphanage. The orphans are sort of like sold to pirates. They are sort of kidnapped in their sleep. It's quite bonkers, batshit bonkers. It's a weird premise. But yeah, the nuns of the orphanage sort of sell the orphans to the pirates, these pirates that have floating ships. You know, it's very sort of unrealistic in a world that is very realistic. You know, World War I is very sort of, it's hard to do that in a fantasy, but they sort of do it. They manage it quite well. But yeah, they started kidnapping these children of the orphanage. And I really like how the sort of pirates are sort of presented as not just pirates, they're sort of clowns and almost like mystical creatures. They're quite creepy as well, like stealing children in the middle of the night. It's quite weird. But yeah, I think it's got some sort of elements of realism and cartoonish nature, which is what Peter Pan is, right? But yeah, the boys start to get quite literally picked up, right? And kidnapped in the middle of the night during the war as well, which is kind of crazy. So it sort of shows Peter Pan before he was aware of Neverland. And I like to think that, before Neverland, he obviously is a normal. And then when he's aware of these, you know, Captain Hook and pirates and Neverland, he sort of activates that Peter Pan, the boy who can fly persona, I guess. But yeah, the boys they get kidnapped and they get sent to Neverland on the flying ship. I just want to mention now as well, the soundtrack of this film is really, really good. I love every song in this film. I think it's really good. John Powell, who did the Solo, Han Solo Star Wars film, is awesome at music and soundtracks. He also did How to Train Your Dragon. which I think is very similar to Peter Pan, right? There are certain bits in this film where the CGI, the 3D models, the sort of CGI 3D models, when they're floating in space, it looks kind of dated for 2015. It kind of looks like Polar Express level of CGI, which is kind of crazy to say for 2015. But other than that, you can kind of ignore that, right? I think the whole like flying pirate ships look really good. Yes, it looks bonkers. Yes, it's a bit extravagant. Yes, it's a bit batshit crazy, you know. But I feel like that's what Peter Pan is, really. He's a boy who can fly. What more can you want, right? I think the set designs of the ships and of Neverland and of London as well are really sort of good at getting the feeling of what they're trying to convey across, if that makes sense. So they're trying to so you find that London is very grey and Neverland is very sort of saturated and colourful, which is obviously London under a war is obviously going to be very grey. But I don't know why in this film, sort of the army is presented as being all female. I'm not sure if there's a reason behind that, or if that was just an Easter egg or something, but the army, the British Army, the London Army, the Air Force are all women. In my opinion, I take that as sort of maybe a reference to the mysterious motherly character of Peter Pan. The character so obviously when she dropped off Peter at the orphanage, she had a hood, and she was very mysterious, right? So maybe that's a reference to, I don't know, like, the mother, you know, they're all blonde white women. I don't understand why they chose to do that. I mean, maybe just to spice the aesthetic up or something. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, but I would love to know if anybody knows why they did that. That'd be awesome. Let me know. So Peter is stolen. He's put on this ship. It's flying through London, and the Air Force are like blowing their ship to bits, and they're like duking all the cannons and stuff. It's kind of cool. It's really cool, actually. I think this is a film that's very sort of Mary Poppins in the way that doesn't need to make sense, you know. If you think too hard about this film, it's going to ruin it. Because there are lots of sort of plot holes. Like, obviously, what if a normal person, well, there's an example, a kid on a train saw the flying ship going through London. If you saw a flying pirate ship, what would you do? Like, you would obviously be a bit spooked by that, right? And then the pirate ship just flies up into the air and then soars down into Neverland. It doesn't really make sense how they do that, but I'm not going to ask too many questions. It looks cool. I think that's what the whole idea is. The ship flies up all the way into space, and there's a specific bit where Peter flies. He starts floating in space, and it looks like he's flying, which is a reference to how he will soon be flying, right? But there's a bit where he sort of knocks a planet, like a planet the size of his hand. And this is what I'm talking about, is trippy, right? It's trippy. It's a trippy film. It doesn't make it bad, not necessarily, right? Not at all. I think it's just weird, wacky, you know? I think it sort of works. I think it works at the end of the day. I think the aesthetic works with it. I think it works, yeah. It's cool. It's cool. I like Neverland a lot. I think, Netherland is obviously an island. It's like a massive island that sort of has like weird things going on. I don't really know much about Peter Pan. Like, I've seen the films. I've seen the classical sort of cartoons, Disney cartoons, right? And then I've seen, Hook, and I've seen Saw, a few Peter Pan projects. There's a 2003 film that I really enjoy. I grew up on that stuff. But this film is very different from that, I think, in the sense that it's I don't think it's that drastically different, but it tackles different subjects with that character and those characters. You know, Hook's in this film, you know, Tiger Lily's in this film, and the big bad of this film is Blackbeard, who is portrayed by Hugh Jackman. And I think that is the highlight of this film for me.
Hello, 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 how low? You know, we're in Neverland, and he's the king of Neverland, or dictator more like it. And he loves it. He loves all the power. He's terrified of losing it. He loves getting dressed up. Actually, it worked for me at home. My wife found him, the bad boy in me, quite sexy. She liked that. I don't know about the bald head bit. I felt completely like him. And I love the idea of this guy who was ruthless, but also fancied himself as this kind of upper class sort of, you know, loved the sound of his voice, loved making long pontificating speeches, and just loves himself. Easy to play. Blackbeard is described as the original nightmare, the pirate that all pirates fear. The reason I like Blackbeard is, yeah, he's scary and he will take your head off in a moment's notice and probably enjoy it, actually. He loves his life. He loves being a pirate. And he's terrified of losing it.
His portrayal of Blackbeard is not only unsettlingly creepy, but it's also disturbing because it's in such a fantastical setting, Neverland, right? With a boy who can fly. And you going into this film, you think, oh, Peter Pan, it's going to be, you know, a boy who can fly, literally like a fantastical fantasy land, right? Neverland that's what it's meant to be, with lost boys and Tiger Lily and like the original cartoon. But this is, especially Hugh Jackman's portrayal of the character Blackbeard, creepy. It is just unrelentingly creepy and gory. There's a specific part where throughout the film he sort of distorts himself and becomes a deluded maniac, and by the end of the film he sort of loses himself and is deluded. It's sort of like the Joker in the sense that he's just insane. He's a tormented man who is terrified, absolutely terrified of dying and being dead, which you can reflect on to classical Hook. So there is that guideline of a Peter Pan film, like I wouldn't say normal, but a classic Peter Pan film with Captain Hook and Peter Pan, right? That rivalry is so iconic in those films. And I feel like you can't make a Peter Pan film without that rivalry, right? So I think they I wouldn't say push, but I think they sort of present that rivalry through Blackbeard and Peter Pan. Blackbeard is sort of he's terrified of death, whereas Hook is sort of terrified of death, but he's more terrified of crocodiles and dying by crocodiles, right? He's not necessarily scared of dying. I think everyone's scared of dying. But Blackbeard, he, you know, being terrified of death may sound silly, but the character of Blackbeard in this film is presented as not only terrified, but sort of tormented by it. He doesn't want to die. He's trying to reach a state of immortality. And the whole reason why they steal these boys, these lost boys, they steal these orphans, is to work in the mines on Netherland and dig for pixin, I think it is called. It's pixie dust, right? So the original pixie dust of Netherland. It's a really awesome concept, having a sort of pre-established Netherland with a evil ruler, Captain Hook-like ruler, right? And then putting, obviously, Peter Pan in this universe is interesting to see his take on the Netherland world. He sort of plays the role of those kids in the classical Peter Pan. You know, the Wendy and the kids, from that film. Peter Pan is sort of trapped in that sort of persona, and it's his first exposure to Netherland, but Netherland is ever so different from that classical Peter Pan. It's changed, right? So this is before the Lost Boys, and this is before sort of, you know, it's a corrupt place, and there's slavery and mining going on, you know, against their will. These kids are being stole and extorted for slavery, which is quite insane. But yeah, Blackbeard, let's talk about him, and let's talk about Hugh Jackman's portrayal of a sort of tormented man, and how creepily he does that. He's a tyrant, narcissistic tyrant, who is at the end of his sanity and is seeking immortality. So obviously Pixin, we talked about that Pixin dust that they're mining for in the caves is what allows Blackbeard to live on and allows him to have immortality. So there's a certain bit where in this film where Hugh Jackman is either wearing prosthetic or it's another older actor. And he sort of is an old, disheveled man or whatever. And then he starts like inhaling this Pixin and starts, I don't know. He starts inhaling it and he comes out looking like as beautiful as Hugh Jackman. So that's the sort of baseline for this evil villain, tyrant, right? He's making people mine for his own immortality, right? And I think Hugh Jackman, like I said, he's the highlight of this film for me. I like Peter Pan's actor, but Hugh Jackman is a good villain. So throughout the film, we learn that there's a prophecy surrounding a boy who can fly, a boy named Peter who can fly, who's going to lead a rebellion against Blackbeard and kill Blackbeard. And obviously that throughout that film, the prophecy becomes true and Blackbeard meets his demise at the end of the film, which we'll get into later. I'm enjoying talking about the sort of some cool things about this film. But that is what sort of scares Blackbeard to its core, is that prophecy, and isn't really the fact that he's going to die. It's the fact that he's going to die to this boy who can fly, right? So when he sees Peter and sees that he can fly in that scene where he gets thrown off the ship and he starts flying, he knows that the prophecy is true, and that's what scares him, right? I think Blackbeard was an awesome villain to choose for this film. If you were to try and implement Hook into a young Peter Pan's life. So Hook is in this film, and so is Smeed, I think his name is, right? His companion. He's a bit of a controversial character. I think he's a little bit like an Indiana Jones type of character with those quippy one-liners and a really annoying accent, right? He's got like a little cowboy hat on as well. So this is a sort of young, early 20s Captain Hook, which I think is an awesome concept, but don't really know if it was done justice on the big screen. The idea of having a young Peter Pan and a young Hook teaming up is pretty cool, but it's something far from that rivalry of the classic Peter Pan cartoon, right? They hate each other in that film. And in this film, they're sort of buddy-buddy in the sense that they need to survive together. And I think Hook is that sort of fatherly figure. And Peter Pan sort of looks up to him in that way. But let's talk about Hook, cause Hook is sort of controversial in the sense that he's a little bit underused, in my opinion. I think he was underused throughout this film, and I feel like he's such a big staple of the classics. I feel like he should have been as big of a character as Peter Pan, right? Obviously, Peter Pan and Hook. He sort of falls in love with, young Hook falls in love with Tiger Lily, right? We'll talk about Tiger Lily in a minute because she's very different from her cartoon counterpart, which in itself is a plot hole because, is it really her? You know what I mean? You could look at that with every character in this film. Are these the same characters that we see in the cartoon? Just older, right? Or are these separate film? Is this film separate and supposed to have its own continuity? That's what I'm assuming, right? But yeah, I think that it's a really good standalone film. I think it's a good time. I think it's an awesome time. If you try ignore the continuity hours between, Hook and Peter and Tiger Lily, it's good on its own, but it's not really necessarily a good film in the sense that it the continuity of Peter Pan, right? I think the action's really fun, especially at the end. I think the ending is awesome with that massive fight on that sort of like, fairy underground cave is really awesome. And like I said, Blackbeard is my favourite part of this film. Hugh Jackman is awesome in everything that he does. He brings that energetic nature. So yeah, we have talked about, obviously, the film as a whole, the sort of middle, beginning and end, the epic fight scenes, the CGI being a little bit, sort of weak for 2015. We talked about Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Blackbeard and how he's a creepy tyrant at the end of his sanity who is seeking immortality from this pixie dust thing that he's stealing children to mine in his mines for. I think that's a really awesome topic to tackle. It's different from the original Peter Pan. Obviously, in the original Peter Pan, we had Captain Hook, and it was more of a pirate story. But in this, it's sort of like a extravagant sort of more extravagant plot that is sort of made to include Peter, Hook, the natives of Netherland, and obviously Blackbeard being the pirate antagonist, right? The soundtrack is awesome for this film. I really enjoyed it. I love that Blackbeard entrance. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. He comes out of his ship, and it's Nirvana's Hey Ho, Let's Go. I forgot the song title, but it's been sort of reworked to sort of fit the theme, and it's an awesome pump for this film, and I think it gets you really excited to watch the rest of the film. We talked about how there's a prophecy surrounding Peter and Blackbeard is terrified of that prophecy. He's sort of scared of dying. He's scared of not being around anymore, but he's more scared of the fact that there's a boy who can fly and that is said to have who's going to be his demise, right? Which we see at the end of the film, which we'll talk about at the end in a minute, but it comes true. And, I think it's pretty neat how they tie it all up. We talked about the, sort of native character of Tiger Lily being a reflection of that motherly character that Peter lost, and that is he's sort of clinging to Tiger Lily and possibly Hook as well as that fatherly figure. Now, I think at the end of this film, they probably set this up to be, a trilogy of, a franchise, as most things do. But it's very apparent because they set this film up to maybe explore that, I think there's a big plot hole surrounding this film, that is, it's hard to avoid because if you know what Peter Pan is and the story of Captain Hook, you know that they're rivals and they're not friends. But in this film, Hook and Pan sort of have that they sort of have that friendship, which is a little confusing on how they get to being sworn rivals and how they're friends. They start as friends and become rivals. That's probably my biggest pet peeve with this film, is that it's the biggest plot hole, is it doesn't make much sense to me. But I was going to say, I think if they were to make a second film, the way they left off the first film is implying that they would have sort of explored that rivalry, and it might have explained that big plot hole in this film. Yeah. And one thing that I liked about this film as well is throughout the film, there are sort of classic references to the original Peter Pan about the lost boys. And, I think there's a sort of cheesy line where it talk about we're lost boys or something like that. It's not implying that the lost boys, obviously the lost boys are sort of the, a group of children on Neverland, right? But they're not in this film yet, but there's references to it, as I say. And there was a reference to Captain Hook's crocodile fear, which is, obviously funny. I think. There's a bit where they're in a boat and he's like, oh, there's crocodiles in here, and he gets a bit spooked. But I wish they sort of maybe implemented he wasn't necessarily afraid of the crocodiles. I think it would have been cool to see how he's afraid of crocodiles, like if he was like thrown into crocodile water and had to escape, and that's why he's got a massive fear of these crocodiles. And then that would be like, oh, okay, so that's why. But they sort of just avoid trying to tell that story and just say that he is just, it doesn't really necessarily need to be told. But I think it would have been cool just to make this film stand out a bit more as a sort of origins for these characters. One thing that I did notice that is a bit of a pet peeve for me personally, there's a sort of delay on impacts. So there's a certain bit with a CGI animal, like a skeleton animal, and then it just sort of, there's like a delayed jump scare, and Hook sort of, their reactions are a bit delayed. And I was like, okay, so CGI obviously in this film, obviously it's CGI, it's gonna have a delay reaction, right? But it happened again with a sort of knives and punches during the fight scenes. There's sort of a delay on, like they swing at them and then there's like a millisecond where they don't react and then they do react. It's a bit weird. But that was just something that I noted because it was hard to not note after seeing that CGI delay, and then I just picked up on it, right? It doesn't ruin the film necessarily. It's just a sort of pet peeve that I have. Is like, how would you have a delay on that impact? You know, this is a film that's made in 2015. You know, it should have done that justice. I feel like. Yeah, it serves as a sort of pre-origin to Peter Pan and Captain Hook and the ensemble of original Peter Pan characters. With a few plot holes and a little bit of flaws such as CGI, and like we just talked about, the impact frames not really hitting as impactful as they should probably be. Now there's a certain bit. Well, let's get into the ending of the film. So I think I like the ending because it sort of sums it up pretty well, and it reminds me of those original Peter Pan cartoons. There's a scene where they're fighting, so they're fighting on two floating ships in this sort of fairy cave. I think it's a really awesome scene. And so throughout the film, Peter Pan, he isn't Peter Pan throughout the film. He's sort of struggling to fly. He's struggling with that persona of being the boy who can fly. He's not known. This is new to him, right? So him trying to fly, it's a bit tricky because it's on and off, you know? But there's this really cool bit where, Blackbeard, during the fight, Blackbeard, you know, gets Peter Pan sort of onto a, what's it called on those pirate ships? Walking the plank, if you will. He's on the plank, that's it, the plank, right? And he's like trying to make him, you know, he's trying to kill him, obviously. He doesn't like Peter Pan. There's a rivalry. He's scared about the prophecy becoming true. But then Peter Pan looks Blackbeard straight into the eye and he jumps off the plank. And I don't know why I noted this, but I think it was really cool because it shows the difference between Blackbeard being absolutely terrified of dying and seeking immortality, and Peter just being brave and jumping off the plank and in looking death in the eyes. And it shows the difference between the two characters, right? One is a very sort of weird character in the sense that he is scared of dying and takes it out on everybody else, his pain, and he's lived for a long time, right? So it's, in the film, he's lived for ages, Blackbeard. He's sort of this immortal creature, which I think's awesome. He's pretty scary as well, I think. Like I said, Hugh Jackman is awesome in this film, but it shows in flashbacks that Hugh Jackman had a relationship with... Oh, Hugh Jackman? No. Blackbeard had a relationship with Peter Pan's mother. I forgot her name and I'm not quite sure. But he ends up killing her because she's sort of a native to the island and he's obviously a pirate. It would never work. But he ends up killing... It's just a way of showing that this guy has lived a long time to see his mother, sort of Peter Pan's mother, right? So the only thing that could defeat him and end his rule of this tyrant is Peter Pan, the boy who could fly. And he jumps off this plank and his face is just like, wow, he really jumped off. It's like crazy. I don't know why I noted that. I think it's really awesome though. It just shows the difference between the two characters, right? We talked about earlier as well, near the end, Blackbeard is sort of becoming a distorted version of himself. And there's a part in the end where Tiger Lily sort of whacks him and his sort of wig comes off. So he's actually bald, but he wears like this wig, I guess. And it's just a really creepy depiction of this character that was already creepy because he's fighting these characters, Peter Pan, and he's looking really, it reminds me of witches in the sort of sense that he is the way he looks and the way he sort of feels. You know, that film, the Roald Dahl Witches film, that was really creepy. But his bald cap, or his bald head is sort of oily and his brain is sort of coming out a little bit. I don't know if you can notice it, but I sort of did. His brain is sort of like weird looking. I don't know if that was just Hugh Jackman's bald head or if that was made to look weird. I think it was probably made to look weird, right? But yeah, he became a distorted version of Blackbeard by the end of the film and obviously became that really nasty villain character. Let's talk about the ending of the film, and how the prophecy is fulfilled by Peter Pan. And then we'll talk about some characters specifically. So let's talk about Blackbeard's demise, right? So he ends in a very classic Peter Pan fashion, and it reminded me in that moment of him dying, of Captain Hook in the original Peter Pan cartoon. So he dies in the sort of way that his ship goes down, he goes down with the ship, and he sort of says something, and then he just dies, and he falls to his death, I think. His ship goes down. I think it's a really cool scene. Yeah, I love the ending because it just wraps up everything, but it is more to that ending. Peter Pan sort of gathers all these fairies, and then in that moment, in doing that, he becomes the Peter Pan that we love and know and love, right? They take on Blackbeard, they defeat Blackbeard, and then they sort of in the post credits they go to London and they free all the orphans from that nasty orphanage from the beginning of the film. And I think it's really awesome. I love the ending because it is classic Peter Pan. He wears that sort of hat and it just shows that, this is a Peter Pan film. He's now become Peter Pan, right? And then they go back to the ship and there's Hook, Tiger Lily all together, at the end of the film. And then, as I said earlier, they sort of were probably planning on doing more films, discovering that rivalry and how that rivalry came about with Captain Hook and Peter Pan. And there's a one-liner at the end where he says, "We'll always be friends, Hook, won't we?" And then Hook says, "What could possibly go wrong?" So it's probably just teasing at a second film. But this film, sadly, did not do very well at the box office. It was not well received. It was not, I don't know why. Personally, I enjoyed it. It's a good film. It's crazy. It's batshit crazy. But I don't really, get why people would not like it. I think I remember going to see it either in the cinema or watching it, like, at home. It's a good film. It's not memorable. It's a good film. Like, it's a feel-good film. If you look into it too deep, though, I think it can have some flaws, like we said. We talked about the CGI and all that. But I think the writing's pretty solid. Yes, it could have been less cheesy. I think Captain Hook, especially, his character is very cheesy. But would I have liked to have seen a second film? I don't know. I think this film works on its own. I think the second film could very much be the classic Peter Pan, right? I would have loved to see, though, how Captain Hook and Peter Pan's rivalry came about, and how the two became sworn enemies. That would have been an interesting topic to tackle, which they could have probably somehow integrated it into this film if they really, really wanted to. I mean, it doesn't have to be this big thing. It could be sort of like a betrayal or, you know, I don't know. But it would have been interesting to see that. It follows that classic Peter Hook. That ending especially follows that classic Peter v Hook guideline, whereas Hook being Blackbeard, I think, like I said earlier, Blackbeard takes on that Hook. Excuse me. Blackbeard takes on that Hook role of being the bad guy, and he's very sort of similar to Hook. You know, you could say that's lazy, or you could have just had Captain Hook, but I think Blackbeard is also a lot more than separate from. He's a lot more batshit than Captain Hook. You know, he's not scared of anything but death. He's not scared of crocodiles. You know, he's scared of the boy that can fly and death and dying to his hand. Right? Yeah, I think it follows that guideline really well. When you have a Peter Pan film, it needs to feel like Peter Pan, and it needs to feel like a fantastical film. And I think they nailed that on the head with this film. It's just a feel-good, batshit movie, and I enjoyed it. But it wasn't, like I said, wasn't well received, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because Peter Pan's an outdated franchise. It hasn't really had much going for it since maybe early 2000s. So when they picked it back up in 2015, nobody really, there wasn't a fan base, there wasn't a target audience. But like I said, I enjoy it. I think it's a pretty good film. I wouldn't say it's the best film in the world. It's not the best film in the world. There's big plot holes. There's cheesy sort of lines, writing. The big standouts for me though in this film are 100% the start. It starts off really good with that orphanage scene. It doesn't try and explain what Peter Pan is, or who he is, or how he got to the orphanage. They just show a sort of scene with his mother taking him to the orphanage, which I think is more than enough, right? You don't really even need that. Most orphans are left on the doorstep, right? But yeah, the start was awesome. That whole bit where they are kidnapped by the pirates and then Blackbeard comes out is so awesome. And it gets you pumped for the rest of the film. Another awesome bit of this film that I love a lot. Sorry, I'm getting tongue twisted because I love it so much. Is Hugh Jackman's role in this film is awesome. As Blackbeard is awesome. I think, he's such a great actor. Obviously he plays Wolverine. He plays other roles, right? But you don't really see him in the role of a villain so far gone. This character is so gone. He's at the end of his sanity, terrified of death, and really creepy and odd. He's really sort of creepily odd. And I think he was the highlight of this film for me. He carried the film on his back. Blackbeard, terrifying. I think the best way to describe it is to go watch him in the role because, yeah, you know, it's really awesome. I love that. Another awesome highlight of this film was the set design and the sort of vibe of it and the pacing. I think the pacing with this film is really awesome. I think it gets things done pretty quick. You know, you go from London, the orphanage, to Netherland, to then the forest. But I think the costumes are really good. I think the vibe, the aesthetic is awesome. I enjoyed looking at the film. I thought it was pretty cool, eye-catching. different, you know, it was definitely different, but unique, but I enjoyed that. Yeah, I liked it. I love the sort of Blackbeard suits. It's so crazy. And his whole crew on that boat has some sort of like crazy clown costumes and awesome pirates. It's an awesome take on that pirate vibe. It's not something that you see all the time, is people just, you know, be extravagant with it. Pirates are very sort of stereotypical, right? Army hearties and all that. But yeah, I enjoyed the set designs, the costume designs, and the portrayal of Neverland. I think was probably pretty cool, pretty modern as well. Like the most modern look at Neverland that we had at the time, from the cartoons. You know, it's difficult adapting, you know, a Disney cartoon and trying to one up it in a live action, especially because, you know, Disney cartoons are very extravagant and very not realistic, you know, they're cartoons, right? But I think they did a really good job one-upping it and sort of making the Neverland vibe of it work. I loved the set designs, the costumes, everything in that film was awesome. Soundtrack, like I said, another highlight was the soundtrack. And I think the acting all round is pretty decent. But yeah, that's some of the highlights that I liked. What was the sort of some, you know, pros and cons? What were some of the cons that that maybe ruined the film in a sort of sense that, not necessarily ruined the film, but sort of maybe are hard to avoid, right? So we talked about the CGI. Obviously the CGI, I don't know why, but in 2015, you should be having good CGI, but it looks the 3D models look almost like Polar Express level of CGI. And now I know the budget for CGI probably wasn't that big because it was the first in the franchise or whatever, but, you know, I think it should have been good for, you know, a 2015 film. There was a sort of delay on action, and the middle and sort of halfway point of the film is a bit of a drag. So that whole bit where they're going through the native land and that whole native bit, I think, is a bit of a drag. But then it picks up in that end scene, and I like the end a lot. One thing that I didn't like as well is there's a bit in the film where they meet mermaids, which obviously Peter Pan, you gotta have mermaids in that. But they're all the same person. They cast one person to play like 5 different mermaids, and they're all the same face. I would have loved to have seen maybe some diversity in the mermaids. I understand that, you know, I understand that it's cheaper to just buy one actor to play these characters. But you don't have to buy necessarily an A-lister. I think the person who they bought was a sort of A-lister celebrity. You know, I don't know. That's sort of maybe just personal in me, but it sort of took me out of the film a little bit because it's like these mermaids are one person. That's really cheap, right? It's almost cheap. But yeah, I think it's pretty good. Me personally, I liked it. So what I'm going to do in this in review episode is at the end of every in review, I am going to review and give a rating out of 10 on this topic. So obviously today's topic is Pan 2015. There we go. The film, right? So I've looked at some other people's reviews of this film, and is all pretty much negative. IMDb rated this film a 5.7 out of 10, which I think is a bit low. But I can understand where they're coming from, you know, maybe from a cinematic filmmaker standpoint, but from a consumer, from a sort of person who isn't a filmmaker, doesn't know the industry, it's a pretty good film in my opinion. I enjoyed it, and it was a good time. It was extravagant. It was batshit. Batshit crazy is the word I would use to describe this film as a whole. It's batshit. It is a batshit time. I've said that so many times. I just love saying it. It's like a fun word. Batshit. But yeah, let's give it a rating out of 10 then. So, overall, let's do it overall. So overall, I think the plot of this film is solid. The middle bit is a little bit of a drag, like I said. The CGI is going to knock some points off as well for being a little bit sloppy. There's some cheesy lines spreaded throughout the film. But I think the plot gets the stories told. It has a great start and a great ending, and it gets the story told throughout. It's going to gain some points for the action sequences are awesome, and it's going to gain the points for Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Blackbeard, and it's going to gain some points for being extravagantly out there. It's out there. It's batshit. And also, the set designs, costumes, and aesthetic all over are top tier, so that's going to add points. The soundtrack is awesome. And I love how it sort of maybe reflects that classic Peter Pan vibe. And how it has references to the classic Peter Pan spread throughout. I love that bit. Yes, it has some cheesy one-liners that maybe are unnecessary, and some massive plot holes surrounding Hook and Peter's rivalry that doesn't make sense, you know. But it also has some really awesome moments where it maybe reflects the characters really well, where Peter jumps off of the plank and Blackbeard is a bit stunned by that because he's a person who's terrified of death and seeks immortality. So I'm going to give this out of 10. Let's say I'm going to give it a sort of in that range of 8. An 8. I'm thinking 8, right? I think 8 is pretty solid. Maybe a 7.5? Possibly. Let me just think. Because if I give it a 7.5, it will be sort of near that IMDb rating, right? And other people's opinions. I'm going to give it an 8. Because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking about it. And that's why I made this episode. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 for this Peter Pan 2015 film. And like I said, we talked about the highlights. We talked about the plot. Go watch this film if you want to see what I'm talking about. Because I think it's a good time. I've said that before. But I might sound like a broken record. But it is generally a good time. If you know what Peter Pan is, I think you need that sort of prior knowledge of the characters, for sure. But go check it out. I think it's a solid origin for these characters. I've been Charles the Nerdiest, and we have done a new In Review episode on the Nerdiest Podcast. Let me know if you like these In Reviews, because I will stop making them if they're not that good. But I just wanted to sort of spread my wings across the medium of not just comics or games or TV or movies. I wanted to do, we're reaching about like 20 episodes on the Nerdiest Podcast. That's a big number. It's a big milestone for this podcast. And I personally want to have complete freedom in the way I approach these episodes and the way I approach things that I like talking about. For example, this film, I wouldn't have usually talked about it on the podcast as a, normal episode, but as a review episode, I think it works really well because other people's opinions on this film are very sort of maybe negative, and I wanted to shine some light on probably one of my favorite Peter Pan films. I think it's a very niche film because of the ratings. People hated on this film into oblivion, and not many people have seen it. But if you have seen it, let me know what you think about this film. I've given it an 8 out of 10. If you think that's too generous, let me know. What would you give this film out of 10? I can't speak, bro. What would you give this film out of 10? What were your highlights? Let me know. I love to talk about these things. Obviously, I've just talked about this whole film for, a long time. But yeah, that's the film. Pan 2015. Awesome. Good time. So I've been Charles the Nerdiest, and that is our first ever in review episode of a movie. So I want these episodes to not just be movies. I want it to be anything that I want to talk about, review on this podcast. So if there's a new film out, like, for example, Supergirl or Spider-Man Brand New Day, we just had the trailer for that come out. I would love to do a video where it's just, or a video or episode where I just come out of the movie theater and talk about that film that I just watched with spoilers and give my initial thoughts on it and then rate it, right? Out of 10. If you guys would enjoy that would be awesome. Let me know if you enjoyed this episode, and I've been Charles the Nerdiest. Until the next episode, guys, stay nerdy and watch out for the crocodile.